If you are a sports fan, you have definitely watched a David Feldman production. He's a TV sports producer, works a lot with the Pac-12 network, but he's very diversified in his sports as far as what he does. And he's an MLB scorer. He's an A's historian. So he's eclectic. And we're going to dive into this. This is perfect fodder, David, for you joining the podcast, because clearly you are onto something. That's the name of this podcast. And we're going to talk about your story from the early days at San Diego State. And you worked at ESPN, big into baseball and other sports as well. So we're going to have a lot of fun. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. You can, of course, follow David on Twitter at DFeldy. But David, as I welcome you in here, there's another David Feldman who you have worked with, who's a sportscaster. How often do people get you to thinking that you're him and he's you, and that they get confused?
Yeah, it's pretty funny. They're both David Feldman's working in the Bay Area, working in sports. Him, of course, in front of the camera, me behind the scenes. But it's happened more times than I can count. I've gotten emails for him. I've gotten paychecks for him, like direct deposit somehow came into my account. I've never told him that, so let's not tell him now. And then we've also worked events together where I've produced and he's been the announcer. And he would sign off the air and he goes, "For our producer, David Feldman, I'm David Feldman." And he would literally get people tweeting at him saying, "You don't even know what you're talking about. You said your name twice." And they'd be like yelling at him on Twitter. It's when I was younger, there was a comedian named David Feldman who worked out of San Francisco. He actually ended up becoming a writer for The Simpsons. And I also lived in San Francisco at the time. I would get his mail at times. I got plane tickets once to New York. I got invited to parties. I actually showed up to one of those parties. They say, "Who are you?" I said, "I'm David Feldman. You invited me."
So when you met him for the first time, the David Feldman, who is the broadcaster, and when you actually worked together for the first time, how did that work out when you both realized that when you looked at the call sheet and you're like, okay, this is strange. This is different.
It's a little strange. Former ESPN anchor, and now he works in San Francisco, Larry Beal. Larry Beal would tell me, because he worked with David at ESPN, and he said, "You got to meet this guy. You're going to love him. He's got your same name." And so he sort of introduced us for the first time. He made like a big deal out of it, saying, "Here's David Feldman meeting David Feldman." So that really broke the ice. And you know what? It's good that he's such a good guy. And it's been fun doing games with him. It's fun working with him. And it's fun fooling people into not knowing who anybody is.
What do you take most pride in as far as you doing games from the producing standpoint? When you come away from a game, and obviously there's a lot of self-evaluation afterwards, I'm sure, but what do you want to do for you to then come out of a game and say, all right, this was what I was looking for. This is where I was aiming for. Sure, a broadcast is never perfect, but what do you like to check off as far as the boxes to where something can meet your standards?
The main thing for me is, if I was at home watching this game, would I be happy with the telecast? Right? I'm always thinking of the person watching at home. What do they enjoy? And what you learn, and you think of yourself as a fan, you've watched enough sports. What's the big thing? Are you watching baseball? You don't want to miss a pitch. You're watching basketball, you don't want to miss a bucket. You're watching football, you don't want to miss a play. And simple things. That's how you watch a game. You just don't want to miss anything. The storytelling and the video packages and flashbacks that enhance a broadcast, they're great. If they're not there, you're not really going to miss them, to be honest, as long as you see every play in the game that you're watching. So I always try and keep that at the forefront of when doing a game. What does the fan at home want to see?
What the fan at home wants to see when it comes to those who are watching your games, and they see who's doing these games from behind the scenes. And then they realize that for you, it's not just producing that you are really good at. I mean, we're talking about somebody who knows everything about Oakland A's baseball. We're talking about an MLB scorer here. So how are you able to become so diversified, especially in a business that could be so draining, so time consuming, where you have the opportunity here to show off how multi-talented you are?
Well, for me, it starts with that I'm a fan, right? I'm a fan of sports. I grew up an A's fan, loved baseball. just to go to games. And so I wanted to do was go to games and just trying to figure out a way to go to games. So I think if you didn't love sports and you're working in sports television, you're in the wrong profession. Um, Especially with, baseball season's long, it's 6 months, but college football is long in its own way. I mean, the games and the game days are long. There's a lot of work that goes into it. If you're not enjoying it and you don't enjoy the sport itself, then you're not going to have a very good time. You're not going to put on a very good show. You got to love the sport. To me, that's where it starts.
There's love, and then there is infatuation, which I think you take as far as when it comes to knowing the stats, knowing the history of A's baseball. There are those fans that like to just sit in front of a television or go to a game and take in a cold beverage and enjoy themselves. But why do you like to get into the nitty gritty of the stats, like in the numbers, and like where does that come from for you, David?
Somebody just asked me the other day, they're like, when did you first get into baseball? And it was when I was 5 years old, going to games with my dad, going to Oakland A's games. And my dad grew up a Philadelphia A's fan. He grew up in Philadelphia. He grew up yelling at Connie Mack when he was the manager. We moved out here at the same time that the A's did in 1968. But I really remember in the early 70s going to games and just loving it. And then being able to read about it. There were sports books for kids. And my mom always made sure I had these little sports books that I could read and these great stories about the history of the game. And I was just taken by it and taken by the numbers and statistics, and that it tied everything together for me. And then I just wanted to know, right? People would ask questions, and that's where a lot of my entry came from, is other people's questions. Hey, what's it like when somebody sacrifices? How often does that run score? Well, to me, it's like, well, let's find out. Let's keep track. Let's find out how that works. And back, then obviously there's not the computer programs that we have today, and there's not the website, so you had to keep it by hand. And even before I started working in the sport, I was keeping score of every game. I was keeping my own notebooks and keeping stats and numbers that I found intriguing, that fans that I sat around the bleachers, they enjoyed, because they would have the questions and I could answer them for them. So I really dug into it that way. And that knowledge just sort of helped lead me to the next stage of actually having a career in this sport.
Where did you keep those notebooks and those score sheets?
I still have many notebooks. I was actually doing some cleaning the other day, and I found some from the late 80s. But I would just have notebooks, and I figured out ways to keep track of things that made sense to me. I would have spreadsheets or any of this stuff. It's all handwritten on paper. Eventually kept game logs for different players. And I did that. I ended up working in A's television. I worked for 16 years traveling with the team, and I kept my own game logs for every player and every pitcher. After every game, I'd fill it out by hand, and it really got me inside the sport. I think, all this stuff is obviously available at a touch of a keystroke, right? You can download this stuff, you can get it on a computer screen, but to really know it and to get into it, I think keeping it by hand was really helpful.
David Feldman is with me. I am Bryan Fenley. Of course, you can follow David on Twitter at dfeldy. I'm on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. David, in a way, the A's organization never gets the credit they deserve. For all the winning they've done, they have won a lot over the years, and I just feel like they never get the credit that they deserve, and they are underappreciated. Where do you feel like, in a way, that you can, in a way, be sympathetic to being underappreciated, and how earlier in your career, when that happened, you were able to rise above it?
But yeah, the A's as an organization have definitely been undervalued. Even when they were winning World Series in 72, 73, 74, they were playing in a near empty Coliseum on the West Coast. There was no TV coverage except for the postseason. And they never got this credit for being the team in the 70s. It was always the Reds who won back-to-back titles after the A's, or the Yankees. Well, the A's beat the Reds in the World Series in 72. The A's won 5 straight divisions. They went to 3 straight World Series. They were the team of the 70s. They never got that credit. Even later, it was always funny with the A's. Like when they would do something great, they would always be overshadowed. Like the A's win the World Series in '89. The earthquake happens. Everyone wants to talk about the earthquake. Dave Stewart throws a no-hitter. Later that night, Fernando Valenzuela throws a no-hitter. Ricky Henderson sets the all-time stolen base record. Later that same night, Nolan Ryan throws his 7th no-hitter. I mean, it was just like they were always overshadowed. And it's really frustrating as an A's fan, feeling that you can't catch a break. Right. And even lately, with the A's success that they had in this decade, they made the playoffs 6 times, but they never really advanced. All right. They got past the White Sox in 2020, but that was it. And it's just, they've never been able to get that foothold of being that super team. The closest they came was the Bash Brother years, right? But again, they lose to the Dodgers and Kirk Gibson in '88, the earthquake in '89, they get swept by the Reds in '90. And actually, the sweep by the Reds is sort of how I got started in sports, actually.
Let's go there. So you went to San Diego State, and then you parlay that to more university study up in the Bay Area. Obviously, you had the passion. A lot of people talk about wanting to get into this business, but they don't have the commitment and the discipline. What separated you from most people?
Well, I think a lot of it was luck and a little ingenuity when I think back to it. So, yeah, I'd gone to San Diego State for a year, and then I went to the University of Maryland for a year. And I didn't get in-state status in Maryland. I couldn't afford to go back there. So I started working at a radio station in the North Bay in Marin County, not on air, but doing what's called traffic continuity, which is basically just commercial logs. But the radio station didn't have a sports department. And I said to myself, why can't I just write the Golden State Warriors and see if I can get a press credential saying I'm representing this radio station? And at the time, it wasn't an email. So it was letterhead, right? Which was stationery that had the station logo and the address and looked real official. I typed up a letter, sent it to the Warriors, said I'm interested in covering the Golden State Warriors season. And lo and behold, a week later, I get a credential back to me in the mail. I'm like, this is awesome. Now I'm just going to Warrior games and I'm hanging out. I'm not working. I'm not covering really. I'm just there, but I'm meeting people and meeting other people who kind of have jobs in sports and radio stringers, AP, Associated Press writers, beat writers for the team. It was really kind of eye-opening learning this. And then I also said, well, if it worked for the Warriors, maybe this will work with the A's and the Giants. Send them the letters. And I think by this time, I don't think I was even working at that station anymore, but I still had their letterhead for this sole purpose to get credentialed. And I got the credentials. And I ended up going to the games and meeting people and learning different little jobs. But finally, in 1990, the A's had just swept the Red Sox in the ALCS. I was at one radio station as a part-timer, and I was supposed to go to another radio station to learn this new computer software program. And it was a night of Game 6 of the National League Championship Series. And I said, all my friends are going to a bar. They're all going. I don't want to learn this new system tonight. I can pick it up in a day. It's no big deal. I'm going to go see my friends. And it really was that sliding doors moment in my career, because I make this decision. I end up going to this bar, see some of my friends. I end up sitting next to Greg Papa. At the time, Greg Papa is the broadcaster for the Golden State Warriors, and he just finished his first year with the A's. And we're talking, and we're watching, and the Reds are about to win the game. And I turned to him, and I said, this is bad. He's like, why? He goes, they're going to play the Reds in the World Series, and they're going to lose. I was like, what are you talking about? For Greg, he just saw this team win 103 games. They're defending champions. There's no way they're going to lose. I said, no, I think they're going to lose. I think they're going to get swept. And now he's incredulous at me. He's like, can't believe it. And he goes, why do you think that? And I kind of laid out my reasoning at the time. And he kind of looked at me and goes, well, that makes sense. So flash forward 2 weeks, the A's get swept in the World Series. I'm at a Warrior game, once again, on a credential, not really working, just being there. And I see Greg in the hallway, and he goes, hey, because you were right, I'm going to put you to work. And I became Greg's stat guy.
Wow. So from there, was that the pivot point for you then, David, to work in television? Because you, and I was going to ask you this as well, how did your background in radio actually make you better at TV producing?
Not in any way at all. Totally different. Yeah, this kind of entered me in the TV in a different way, right? I'm just Greg's stat guy, doing Warrior stats and A's stats. I'm just in the booth, not really knowing much about what goes on in a television truck or what goes on in a production. I mean, I was so naive. I thought camera people just showed up like an hour before the game and started, working the game. I thought they had like real jobs and then came and worked camera at night. I had no idea this was their career, that they're there 6 hours before a game, setting up the cameras or setting up the TV truck. No idea. So I learned that. And then again, meeting people, showing up. I got a job with the A's when they moved to an over-the-air station. I ended up working inside the truck as a graphics person, and then eventually an associate producer. And I learned the ins and outs of television that way. But I really love doing stats. I love just doing the information and getting nuggets and whatnot to Greg and to the TV truck and building graphics. But then you learn television, right? And stats, you can only go so far doing stats, and there's much more opportunities if you can do production inside of a TV truck.
When Greg sees how far you've come ever since he brought you on, what does he tell you when he sees your rise and emergence?
Yeah, he's always been great. I mean, we've been close friends now for over 30 years, and he's just. I wish we got to work more together because we really work well. Because I knew what he knew. Because Greg works as hard as any broadcaster I've ever worked with. I knew where we would go with stuff, and I'd be able to follow him along with graphics or videotape packages. But yeah, it's great seeing him, and he's thrilled with me, and there's no doubt he loves the story of how we met, and for me, it's my career-defining moment.
Since then, you have gone on to go in work with ESPN, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes.
Pac-12 networks. So this was just the starting point. Obviously, we talked about with you and Greg, and how, when you look at what you've done and the time at ESPN and with Pac-12 networks, if I were to tell you you were doing this when you were a freshman at San Diego State, what would you think that I was doing? Would you think that what I was saying would happen? Would you think that I was crazy? Where did you think your life was going ultimately if it weren't for Greg Papa?
Yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a radio baseball play-by-play guy. That was the dream as a kid. But my path didn't really take me that way. Even in school, I ended up not really doing play-by-play. I did some more radio DJing, but it was always something in sports. So if you told me then that I'd get to go to games for a living, I'd take it, because that's all I really wanted to do, is go to games. And I distinctly remember this, working at a radio station, and there was a Giants Day game, and a bunch of people took the day off to go to the game, and I had to work. And all I could think was, well, this sucks. I want to go to the game. I got to figure out a way that I can get to go to the games, and that was the key. And even, doing stats or doing official scoring or doing production, it's just a way to go to games. And I just love going to games.
How do you get in with all the games that you've gone to and the many more you are going to go to, when it comes to cohesion in the production truck? Where do you stand on that, and what role do you play to make as much chemistry happen as possible?
Yeah, it's a big thing. And it's another team. It's a team effort to put on a TV broadcast. I mean, you have the replay department, you have the camera operators, you have the graphics, you have audio. There's a lot of different places that all have to meld together. And a lot of times you're working with a crew that's sort of a one-off thing. You get thrown together. It's not the same people every day. And to me, it's the focus on the game and trusting the people you're working with. If you're hired to do a job, you're hired for a reason. If you're hired as a camera operator, I'm going to take the assumption you know what you're doing. If you're hired as an audio person, I'm going to assume that you know what you're doing until you show me otherwise. And I'm going to let you do your thing. I don't know that I'm not a technical person at all. I'm one of those guys who says, hey, let's do this. And hopefully other people can figure out how to do that. Because I have no idea. So I really trust the people around me. And I think that pays off. They end up trusting me back because I give them the trust to start with. But it's team building. I've been lucky enough with Pac-12 Network to work a college football crew. And that's one of those instances where we do travel the same crew week after week, and you get to know each other. And it's awesome because I've never been around a group of people who enjoy doing the games as much as these people do. And that's a big thing. You want people who want to be there. The worst thing you can have, and this is definitely more than happens in baseball than any other sport, is you show up with a crew and they're all bitching about how long the game's going to be. Oh, yeah. God, it's going to be 3 hours. Like, you're going to a baseball game for 3 hours. Really? This is bad? This is pretty good. So you want people who want to be there. And I've been lucky enough with my football crew to have that's that group of people who just love doing the game and love being there.
David Feldman is with me. I'm Bryan Fenley. In working with crews, and some, like you said, you've worked with for quite some time, that obviously aids in the chemistry. But what is the nicest compliment you've ever gotten from someone on air who you've worked with on a broadcast?
Ooh. Just if you do something that's timely, that sets the scene, and sometimes the broadcast will acknowledge that hey, our producer David Feldman, roll this in. That to me is fun. A few times I have no ability to write anything, but I can do a Valentine's Day poem like nobody's business. I don't know what it is. I can make things rhyme in a cheesy way. And I've been lucky enough to have games on Valentine's Day where I do these poems and have the announcers read them. And they've always been very nice to give me credit for that. And that to me is fun. It's fun to have these ultra talented men and women read words that you write and enjoy them. And that's always a nice feeling.
How did you get so good with words?
I'm telling you, it's just stupid Valentine's Day teases or poems. And that's pretty much it. I don't know where it comes from. And again, it only happens once a year. It's like that one day. Although I did do a Halloween poem once that I had the great Kevin Calabro read. And if you know Kevin Calabro with his big voice, and he really got into it with kind of a scary laugh, it was top shelf.
Not to put you on the spot, but if you were to write like a haiku or a short poem describing your career and the waves that it's taken, where would your mind go?
It would just go to luck. It was somewhere with luck. It really was. It's just, and we've had chances on college campuses to talk to broadcasting class and young students, and they always ask, how do you get involved? How do you do this? How do you do that? And one of the things I try and stress is showing up. Just be there, right? And you never know. You meet people. You be a good person. Don't be somebody who's annoying or not, but be somebody who's there and interested and showing up. And once people see you there and they see you enough, they're going to give you something to do, right? So that's when I think of my career, a lot of it's just being there and showing up and being lucky. Like, you talk about like official scoring, right? So I'm always in the baseball press box in the Bay Area. And I'm always there and I'm talking to the official scorers, because if I don't agree with a call or not, I might make my opinion known. And then eventually one of the official scorers in the Bay Area passed away. So there was an opening and they said, well, you're always bitching about it. You do it. Like, this is awesome. But again, it's just being there, right? Just have been showing up and being somebody that was there that they could eventually point to when there was an opportunity.
What is a controversial call in Major League Baseball when it comes to scoring where your mind was really put to the test?
Luckily, I've been pretty stable with plays. I haven't had anything too crazy. And I know the rules. And again, I've seen enough baseball. You do get a chance where you second guess yourself sometimes because you worry about what other people will think. Even if you know you're right, you worry about what the broadcasters are going to say, what the other writers are going to say. It's just natural. So you have to really trust yourself. But the one thing I didn't expect was in 2007, Mark Ellis of the A's was going for the cycle. And he was a single away in the bottom of the 8th inning. So what could have been his last at bat. A's have runners on first and second. There's a shot to third base that Kevin Youkilis, who's actually playing third for the Red Sox in this game, fields, makes a great diving stop, gets up, and he has plenty of time to throw the runner out at second, who's advancing from first. But the throw pulls the second baseman off the bag. So it's fielder's choice, E5, not a hit. Crowd boos as they put the scoring over the scoreboard. I'm like, really? Really? I'm like, this is a simple call. The crowd's moving because they wanted to see Mark Ellis get the cycle. Game actually goes into extra innings. Mark Ellis eventually does get a single in extra innings. And Eric Chavez hits a walk-off home run for the A's. So after the game, the writers are around Eric Chavez. And at that time, Eric was the only other player to hit for the cycle in the Coliseum. So they asked Eric, hey, Mark Ellis now has the cycle. He joins you. Eric Chavez goes, he got the cycle twice. That should have been a hit. The official scorer should be shot. It
Oh,
should
God.
not be invited back to return. And so I like the order. It had to be shot first and then not invited back. But yeah, so that was a controversial call I didn't know or expect. You think about things in no hitters or whatnot, but you don't expect guys going for the cycles and fielder choices getting to be controversial.
How close are you to having a photographic memory? I listened to you break this down, and I feel like this game happened yesterday.
Yeah, I've been blessed with a good memory of being able to see things and to remember them. I've always been that way since a kid. I would have dates would correspond to games, right? If you ask me, okay, September 12th, 1986, well, that's A's Cleveland, Terry Steinbach, Major League debut, home run off Greg Swindell. That's just how I relate things. It's not as great, probably as I've gotten older. But there are still games that I can definitely still see and almost feel by seeing it. I just kind of see it in my head.
David Feldman is with us. He's on Twitter at dfeldy. I am on Twitter at Bryan Fenley. I'm with Fox Sports Radio. So, David, I've got one more question for you. And I think about how unique your career is. And when you think about a TV producer, you fit the mold and more. So when you converse with your colleagues who are also television sports producers, and they see what you do on top of your responsibilities in television, what do they say about you? And how much do you look at them and say, well, you're doing great, but I'm also doing this too? Like comparing yourself to them.
Yeah, it's different. I mean, there are some people who definitely came up in a way that this is what they wanted to do. Right? They always knew they were going to be in TV production somehow, and they're going to produce games. And there are tremendous sports producers all over. There are also some people who just aren't great at it. They don't have a feel for it. But because they've taken these steps, right? You get a job maybe at Fox as a broadcast associate, and then you move up to associate director, and then they kind of move you in the producer chair. It's just this progression, but maybe you're not great, but you're still getting promoted. I always feel at least that I've kind of earned where I'm at, but I still feel like I'm fooling people a lot of the time. I mean, because deep down, I'm just a stats guy. I mean, I know that. I have an idea of what a sports broadcast should look like, and if I have the right people around me, I can make that work. But I'm fooling people. Oh, come on, I don't have that background that a lot of people do. So I think that's when people look at me. They might be looking at me like I'm getting away with something, which they're not entirely wrong.
I think that you're entirely too humble. I think that's what this all amounts to. But David Feldman, this has been a lot of fun looking at your career and someone who is so involved in stats. I think you're batting over 300 when it comes to your career and what you've done. And I would think that even though you aren't publicly going out and saying you're doing all these cool things, you really are. And so I just want this to be that opportunity, that space for people to really see what you do and give you some of the credit you deserve. And I know that you're a team-oriented player because there's so many people involved in what you do. But it's really cool to follow your career. I know we met a couple years ago, but just to see how you've been able to affect and impact positively so many lives in sports media and continue to do moving forward. David Feldman, I'm Bryan Fenley. Really appreciate you doing this, man.
No, thank you, Bryan. Thank you for the kind words. That is very, very kind of you.